I am so excited to welcome Cheryl Hall to our podcast. Cheryl is an amazing person, an amazing mom who has survived a very harrowing experience with her daughter. And I just want you to know that my heart goes out to you from the moment I met you and heard your story. And I knew I wanted you to come and tell it on our podcast. And so for you to come and be here today is just huge for me. Thank you for joining me.
You're welcome. It's huge for me too. From the minute I heard your story, I connected very strongly with you as well. Almost as if you were my daughter. Like, it was a very strange, I connected with you on a friend-to-friend level, but when it shifted perspective to your childhood, there was a lot of parallels to my daughter. And I almost, it was a compulsion, really, to go up and speak to you and be like, I need you to hear this because I feel like this is A, going to help you, and B, going to help others. And it was something that I didn't know till I had been through this. And anyway, then I went home and saw your story. I actually just knew briefly that you were kind of a local, I don't want to say celebrity, but person of interest. When I watched the story, I was like, absolutely the right decision to go talk to her. Absolutely. I feel a deep kinship. Absolutely. And my husband, my husband had to physically restrain himself from ripping the TV off the wall in how protective he felt over you while watching your story as well. So we both reacted very strongly and identified that way. Probably not unusual, probably most viewers.
Well, I don't know that I've heard it quite like that. It's very sweet because you're obviously younger than I am, but to have that kind of empathy and that nurturing feeling for me and my story and my little girl experience that's been with me throughout my life, as we will talk about for your own daughter and your experiences with her and this story that will unfold. But it's interesting that you would react so strongly because you felt the parallels. And I think that is what makes telling our story so important, is that many times people who can't believe my story, oh, that's just, how do we, how in the world, those dumb parents, that dumb girl, that
Thank
whatever.
Goodness.
Right?
You must be very blessed if you cannot imagine this to be true. Right?
Exactly.
For me, perfectly. I believed every second of it, and it was exactly how I would have imagined that things would unfold. No part of your story was unbelievable to me.
And that's because of what you've been through. Sadly. Yes. And sadly, because of your experiences, you could relate to every piece of it, and you could see the unfolding as we're going to hear about your story. And I want you to know that you can start wherever you feel the most comfortable. But I really think it's important for people to know that, as unbelievable as these stories may sound, they are true. And we are talking to the source.
Yeah.
We are not talking to, the media who's going to take license and liberties and whatever and focus on this and not on that. We're telling the truth so that it will help other people in unpacking their truth. Right? That's why you wanted to.
And I think also, yeah. It's not just the unpacking of the truth, but it's the ability to find parallels and patterns. If yours is the only one that unfolded this way, how would we know how to stop it? How would we see the warning signs? Because that's one person. That's not across the board. And so my story, like every other, honestly, 1 out of 3? 1 out of 3 moms is going to be like, yeah, my daughter was sexually assaulted. 1 out of 3 women is. So, if you're in a group of friends and there's 3 of you and you haven't been sexually assaulted, the one of the other 2 have. Like, it's just common. So the part that I like to, I guess, focus on is the what didn't I see coming? Why didn't I see it coming? Why didn't my daughter see it coming? A lot of people think, well, that happens to other families, or that happens to, parents who weren't paying attention, or, maybe I don't know. There's just a lot of sort of stigma around it. I was not what you would call an accidental parent. And I think that's key to this story. I went through 8 years of infertility, and then we adopted my daughter. And this was something that was very intentional. It was my my driving passion in anything I ever wanted to do. I wanted to be a good parent. I wanted to be a good mom. Like, not just, okay, I'm a mom and I want to be good at it, but like, I had to spend a lot of time, money, and effort to become a parent in the first place. This wasn't,
Right.
I call it goose parenting. I don't know if you've ever seen someone with geese. They kind of just let them go, but they kind of have a little stick here and a little stick here. And for the most part, the geese just sort of do what they want. That was not me. I was researching. I was reading books. I wasn't just going to be a good parent. I was going to determine what my daughter needed and be her good parent. Like, I was
Mm.
so my
Involved.
ADHD plays into it. This was my hyperfixation, right? This was the thing I delved into. When people like say that they're, they geek out over something, I was that over parenting. So,
Wow.
I was the oldest in my family. So of seven
As am
children.
I.
And so I was yeah, I was parentified anyway, right?
Yes.
And then I was also a little older by the time my daughter arrived, and she was older. She was a month before she turned 4 is when we. There's a really only a weird way to say it, but essentially when she joined our family.
Right.
So this was all very intentional.
I wish there was a less weird way. She is your family. There is no
Right.
different
Right.
way to
She
say it,
was 4
right?
when she was born.
She was
Right.
born into our family at
Yeah.
age 4. Maybe we say it like that
Right.
because it's
And they
really
call
true.
it in the adoption world, it's called Gotcha Day, but that feels very aggressive to say
Hmm.
gotcha. Like, that's a thing. I don't know. I mean, it is what it is. It's just our family. So I always say,
I mean, you're going to talk about, near trafficking that experience.
yeah,
So, yeah, gotcha. That
right.
that feels
Yeah.
extra funny
Gotcha.
with your story,
Well,
with your daughter.
even, so when we left with, my daughter was out of state and my husband, I had some anxiety. And so waiting for the IC, they call it an ICPC, but basically the states allow the transfer of a child from one state to another state, as far as custodial, oversight onto who is adopting them. So my
Mhm.
husband, I always told him, I said, you deliver this one, I'll get the next. He went down to, the state where she was at, went over to the state where she was at, and picked her up and flew through, I want to say he went through 2 or 3 different airports, with someone who was not biologically related to him, and he had no paperwork to show that she belonged to him, and no one ever
Mm.
stopped them. And she
Mm.
was calling him new daddy the whole time. So that began kind of our story of like a very weird awareness that like no one questioned this. Like, somebody should have questioned this and no one did. Um, and
Yeah.
this was, a while ago. It was early 2000s. But it was after 9/11. So you would think
Yeah.
somebody would have questioned this. If you hear a little tiny girl who does not look like her father calling a man new daddy, right? Like as
Wow.
grateful as I was that there was no trouble, why wasn't there trouble? So I didn't even
Right.
delve into that part. So that kind of piece of the story kind of stuck in my craw as I raised her. And she was extremely intelligent. I use past tense was. This is because I'm speaking about her as a child, and who she is today is a very different person. But as a child, she was extremely intelligent. She was the leader. Her birthday parties would have, like, no joke, 70 kids arrive. Like, it was insane.
Wow.
And I always told her, you're not allowed to play at someone's house if I find that you're being a follower, if you are subject to peer pressure or, something that you shouldn't be doing. Now I know that you're not managing your own behavior. You need to be the leader, right? You can't
Yeah.
just follow what other people want to do. You need to use your intelligence to make good decisions. And, we're LDS, and I was what I would call nuanced LDS, where I don't know, everyone else would call me a rebel. But I kind of took things like, I how do I say this? there were certain things that didn't add up to me. And I went, oh, well, they must have got that wrong. And I'm going to kind of pare everything down to very, very core doctrine as far as living our religion needs to make sense. It needs to be logical. And there is also obviously that spiritual element. Above all, we are Christ-like. We show Christ-like love. We
Serve.
we respect our leaders and what we're taught, and I thought that I was teaching her to think critically because of how I was nuanced.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't understand what the role of neurodivergence would play. And I found out after the fact that she had been taught in a young women's lesson that if you are being sexually assaulted, that it is better to die trying to stop it than to let it happen and live. And so when she went through all of this, she had this Hollywood version of rape and wasn't really processing it.
Okay, so will you explain to our listeners neurodivergent and the Hollywood? That's such a good way to put it, and I know exactly what you're talking about, but I want to make sure everybody does.
So Hollywood rape is where somebody is a stranger that you don't know, that aggressively, physically drags you somewhere and holds you down to assault you, right? If you were to say really any rape scene in any movie, right? If I were to say rape, picture a rape, and not to you because this could be very triggering, but someone who hasn't experienced this has sort of this stereotypical, I call it the Hollywood version, that it's not a romanticized thing, but it's a dramatized thing, right? Mm-hmm. Something is obvious. Like you're not going to see that and go, I wonder what's going on here. You know right. What you are seeing. So yes. She had an understanding of that, partly because I protected her from, she was safe. There weren't predators in her space. I did a very good job at sort of acknowledging and seeing, threatening things around her and just eliminating that because no. And then, so neurodivergence is anywhere from ADHD to sensory processing to Asperger's to autism. And what they're finding now is it's all on what they call the autism spectrum. It's just where you land and what kind of how that shows up. It's a brain difference. And divergence means divergent thinking. So you have neurotypical and then you have neurodivergent. And the way that you process information from the world around you is fundamentally different when you are neurodivergent. And this was something that I kind of picked up with your story as you were speaking. I was like, oh my gosh, I don't know if she's acknowledging or honoring this portion because I felt this very strong with you. And it played into a very big role. So someone who is neurotypical can take all of the data around them and then distill it into one core point. Someone who is neurodivergent takes something and then can make a million possibilities out of it. So it diverges the thought process. And then you look at it and go, okay, which one fits? So there's a lot of creativity and things like that. But also because of that, you're not absorbing all the data and bringing it into a point or a decision. You tend to rely on expertise and people's opinions and someone saying something is, and these become concrete. So when someone told my daughter, it's better that you should die trying to be raped, she didn't think, well, unless you can get away, or well, that might be that person's opinion. That is now the social rule that she lives by.
That's the truth.
Because she was told it is. Right. Now that has become the truth. And it was doubly reinforced because it came from church, what we would call a high demand religion, where this wasn't something that you would live casually. It colored every aspect of our lives. And this sort of black and white thinking of there is only rape or death, right? There is only these two options. The sort of duality. So that was another piece of your story that I was like, I get that, because there's this thought process that a neurotypical cannot connect to. And if you go and you do some research, you'll see that neurodivergent thinkers tend to be the majority of victims. They make really good victims because they will believe almost anything you say.
And they want to please.
And if
they're ADHD or whatever,
right,
it's
people
big,
pleasing, the good girl syndrome. You don't want to cause a fuss. You don't want to make a ruckus. You know, somebody said something about, I said, like, oh my gosh, you know, like, why didn't you yell, or why? I can't remember what it was, that it wasn't something intense. It was something like just somebody treated them wrong on a date. And they were like, oh, I didn't want to offend him. And I'm like, why do you care about offending? Like this, again, it brings it back to the element of religion that you have to be nice. Well, nice is different than good. Nice is different than healthy. Nice is what you do on the outside. And this idea that we should be nice, or that there's, again, with neurodivergence, that social contract is ironclad. It is ironclad. You don't break it. You spend your whole life trying to figure out how not to break it, because everyone else can figure it out. And you always seem to be, you know, sort of experiencing negative consequences because you talk too much, too loud, you were too, you know, passionate about something, whatever it is. So you learn to dial back that.
Yes, like hanging in the balance also. You know, there's this big like payoff or reward, and there's this really terrible thing if you don't achieve the goal or whatever, you know, as she ingested what was, you know, taught by someone who had absolutely no right.
Who she's taught to listen to.
Yeah, exactly.
Right. And I didn't know that this was what was being taught. And she didn't know to tell me this was being taught, because she trusted that what I was exposing her to was real and truthful and all of that, not understanding that there were nuances where I could say, that was a holdover from the patriarchy, and we're not going to think that way. I didn't have the ability to combat that because she didn't have the ability to see it as strange. And that was really hard for me to like come to accept with. So she ends up, and I'll just tell the story really, really quick. A boy younger than her, she meets. I didn't like him, but I'm not going to be the mom. I need to be nice. I'm not going to be the mom that is judgmental because somebody appears some way that I don't approve of, right? I'm not going to, personally, I'm not a judgmental person, but even so, if I were to be like, I don't like that boy, well, guess what she's going to do? Run off to that boy, right? Like it's not, you're kind of just stuck being nice and hoping that she won't try to hide it. And all of a sudden, I mean, things were kind of rocky in the beginning. Like we had dealt with some anorexia and some autoimmune stuff and some mental health challenges and some self-harm and things that sort of came about through the middle school years. But she really stabilized. And all of a sudden I was like, oh, wow, we're on a good path. And we had about a month of that. And then she met this boy. And I noticed she started changing. She started withdrawing. I kept trying to engage with her and stuff. And she, you know, he would come by the house and, you know, play his guitar. And like, it wasn't, there was no strangeness to it really. And he was her boyfriend. So, you know, I really just didn't think too much of it other than, you know, something's weird, something's different. And because of my intentional parenting, and this is another thing, when I say like I did everything right, you can't do everything right as a parent, but I had all the boundaries and protocols in place that would keep her safe. I had her turn in her cell phone at night. She wasn't even allowed to have one till she was 16. I tried to monitor her social media accounts that she wasn't really allowed to have, right? Like I had to have all the passwords and whatever. So despite me doing all of this, I would come to find out later in her life that when she was 13, when she was younger, someone told her, don't use your school account, just create a new email address and then your mom doesn't know about it and you can use that to sign up for social media. Right. So, there was no way for me to catch that because she would then only do it on the school computers. So her first online victimization by men was happening around age 12 or 13 at school, not at home where I thought I had control of the internet and media and things keeping her safe.
Right.
I wasn't somebody that was like, oh, it'll never happen to me. I went into parenting believing that this was as real a threat as malnutrition and breaking an arm. And like, this wasn't just something that I set on the shelf to not deal with. I was actively trying to prevent this with my parenting.
Yeah.
So the fact that it happened, like, you know, here's how you can do all these things, and then it still happens. So she had to have good grades in order, well, not even good grades. She had to have no zeros. If any assignment was a zero, I had her cell phone until she had completed the assignment, that she'd brought it back. And I was checking this daily, right? Like, I only have one child. She is my focus. I'm a stay-at-home mom, one child. This is all I'm focusing on, is raising her right. So I noticed, like, she started having, like, she had some hickeys, and I was like, kind of teasing her a little bit about it, but she didn't react the way I would think she would react. And I was like, okay, this is weird. And she quit sleeping, and she quit being able to get up for school. And then some days she would just refuse to go to school, and her grades just went, and this is over the course of like a month. Like, this was fast. This was like school started and bam, right? And all of a sudden I got a call that she, like, I went in to be like, why are there so many zeros? And she's like, well, your daughter checks into class and then leaves in the middle. And I was like, she what? So even though I was like, well, I would know if my child wasn't in school because they would call me and tell me she was absent. No, because she would go to class and then he would check her out. He would go in and knock on the door or give her a signal to where she would leave in the middle. So I wasn't getting the absence notifications. And then she would come home at night, and she was involved in drama. And the thing that kicked it to my attention is the drama teacher called me and said she didn't show up for practice today. And I was like, it's 8, or no, I went to pick her up. It was like 8:00 at night. And he was like, no, she hasn't been showing up to practice for like, a couple weeks. And I was like, okay, this is her passion. This is like her life. Imagine a horse girl not wanting horses, right? Like, this is her thing. And I couldn't find her anywhere. And I finally tracked her down at this boy's house. And my husband went to go get her, and she was basically like, so she'd gotten diagnosed with asthma that summer. And she was in the middle of what you would think was an asthma attack and whatever. But it almost looked like a seizure, like something was dramatically wrong. She was just on his driveway. Like, we couldn't figure out what was going on. And eventually she drowned herself at a safe space, like take your kids to have a timeout at this, family first, kind of like a little, I don't even know what to call it. She was in therapy. So we were all in therapy. She was in therapy. I was in therapy for years and years and years through all of this. Like, all the tools were there. So anyway, she drowned herself, and that was I think that was the second attempt. She'd been hospitalized a few weeks earlier for, honestly, a psychotic break. And they sent her to Provo Canyons, where Paris Hilton went. Not a good experience. Not a good experience at all. In fact, terrifying. I really do believe that place needs to be closed down, but I digress. Anyway, she was there, and they're like, okay, 2 weeks, she's good, send her home. And I'm like, dude, she's not good. I'm not equipped. This is going to just happen again. We don't know why it happened. This was an extreme event where she snapped. This like 5 grown men were trying to hold her to a gurney, and she still escaped with, like, handcuffed behind her back. Like, this was extreme. 2 weeks is not going to fix this. So I was already like,
and she's how old?
Aware.
Right.
15, 16. Yeah. 15, 16, 10th grade. And I had been warned, this kid's not a good kid. He gets in fights, and I'm like, yeah, I can tell he's not a good kid, but, he just looked like what I would call a scuzz bucket, just kind of scruffy. Not real put together, and didn't seem to care about his appearance. And if it was very dark. And I kind of went, I was one of the emo kids in school, sort of. So like, I know in some cases that's not bad. That's just trauma. So I don't want to be judgmental. But anyway, I had friends go, be careful with Autumn. This isn't a good guy. And I was like, okay, I'll watch. So he was kind of on my radar, but again, she didn't talk much about him. I didn't really, it's not like they were going out on dates a lot and he was always around. It was just a random guy that kind of was in her space. So anyway, because she had drowned herself, she was taken to uni, and again, 2 weeks stay. And I just went, she can't come home. She's going to be successful. She had drowned, and then they found her a few minutes later and had to be resuscitated. So I always say that my daughter successfully killed herself, because who she became after that event is not the same. This is why I speak about her in the past tense. So her childhood is the past tense. She's no longer that person. She went without oxygen long enough that she's not that person anymore. For better, for worse. I love her either way. This is just a completely different, I don't know, season 2. This is season 2 of her life.
Okay.
So she was resuscitated. She had some issues. And we just went, what do we do? And they're like, well, we can't hold her any longer than 2 weeks unless she goes to the state mental hospital. And in order to get, I want to say there were like 18 beds available for all of Utah, for any female in Utah, 18 beds at this state mental hospital. But once you do that, you sign over your parental rights, you pay child support to the state. Usually a judge has to determine that it is severe enough to warrant this level of intensive treatment. And it is open-ended. There is no 2 weeks. It's just, we'll let you know if and when we ever think she's coming out. So really traumatic. That was where my husband had ducks. That was his coping. That was what I was talking about. And I don't know, he goes, I don't know what's worse. Seeing her robe hanging on the hook in our bathroom, knowing that she's not here, or putting the robe in her room and seeing the empty space where her robe used to be. He goes, I don't know what's worse. We knew where she was. We knew that she was safe, but we also knew that it was extremely triggering and traumatic for her to be in this place. And so we would drive to Salt Lake every single weekend for therapy and to visit her. And we had Christmas in the state hospital. And 10 months goes by and we still don't really know why she drowned herself. We have no clue. We just know that, life was hard. She was stressed out. We knew that these boys were probably not healthy friends that she was hanging out with. There was kind of a group of kids. And that was it. So after 10 months, they're like, okay, we're good. She can go home. And I was still like, she's pretty fragile, right? Like she's still not even 18 yet. She's just 17. So I guess she was 16 when that happened. It was the year she turned 16, because now she's 17. She's home and she needs to finish up her school. And, she's meeting with her therapist and going to school. And one of the school lessons was talking about it was a rape or a sexual assault that had occurred. And the teacher started discussing it in sort of a judgmental way. And Autumn started having this massive panic attack. And so they took her, it was a special school. I don't know if you've heard of like the county behavioral. Like when you come out of a mental health situation as a teenager, you don't go straight back into regular high school. You attend school at a behavioral health, kind of like outpatient treatment. You sleep at home, but you go to school and you have therapy in this behavioral health county center. So anyway, they sort of took her to her therapist, and her therapist was like, what is going on? Like, you got really angry. You started melting down. Like where did this connect? And she started talking about this relationship about, basically, at this point, she had realized that this guy was probably not a good guy, but still didn't wrap her head around it. And after she got done talking about it, her therapist looked at her and goes, that's rape. And she goes, well, I didn't fight back though. And she goes, no, that's rape. You were raped. And she was like, just all of a sudden now the full weight of what she had been through just hit her. And it sort of destroyed her a little bit, because now all of a sudden there's all this memory of, it wasn't just a toxic relationship, right? And
Yeah.
I realized then she comes home and she talks to us about it, and I was mind blown. So he would take her out of school and sexually assault her. And you're thinking, well, if she didn't want to go with him, why wouldn't she go, right? So what he had done is, he's her boyfriend, so that's what you do. That's the social contract, is you are physical, right?
Mm-hmm.
But also he was kind of a dangerous guy. And I found out again later that he had these, like, he would talk about these fantasies of a school shooting in our little town. And she, of course, grew up with everybody. Everybody knows everybody. This is a very tiny community. So every single person who would be hurt is someone that she cared about, right? This isn't like other random kids. So she was like, you can't do that. And like, how do I keep my friends safe? How do I keep my family members safe? And she's like, well, what if you did that and then you accidentally hurt me? So she's like trading on this relationship. And he said, well, wear red, and then I'll, like, that will register that you're wearing red, and then I'll not shoot you. I won't shoot you. So
Oh my
terrifying
gosh.
enough, right? That part's terrifying
Yeah.
enough. Well, then for weeks, every day or maybe every other day, he would either call her in the morning and say, are you wearing red today? And then hang up. Or he would call her the night before and say, hey, be sure you wear red tomorrow. And
Gee.
I mean, the
Psychological
mental,
terror.
like,
Yeah.
right. Same thing. I have to keep the people I love safe. I will sacrifice myself to keep the people I love safe. He knew where she
Yep.
slept. He had threatened to kill us. And she could tell this was a person that did not have boundaries, right? Like, when you're dealing with somebody that, and you probably instinctively know, when you deal with somebody that does not care if they cross other people's boundaries, you tread carefully, because you don't have that social contract of they're only going to go this far, right? You
Right.
know, the average coworker that gets really mad at you is only going to go this far. It's not
Right.
somebody who is going to, like, put a bomb under your office chair.
Desk.
Like, you don't wake up
Right.
every morning, go to work, and check it for a bomb under your office chair, because that's not even in the realm of possibility. You trust this
Right.
social contract. So she said, well, I didn't fight him off. I just kind of went along with it. And so I guess that means that I agreed. And she had never understood the concept of coercion or grooming. And again, once it happened, she was now damaged goods. According to what her religious leaders had taught her, she was damaged goods. Her life had no more value, because, again, it's better to be dead than lose your virtue, which never is any sexual assault a loss of virtue. And even
No.
even if you are a willing participant, you still have virtue. Like, this is not,
Yeah.
this whole purity culture thing is so harmful and so
Destructive.
damaging and so predatory
Yes.
anyway. So, but I didn't even have a chance to have these conversations with her, because she didn't want to disappoint me. She knew what I believed. And even I said, it wasn't even about, like, it's a sin if you have sex. I always taught her, don't start having sex until you are ready to be a parent, because it will happen. It wasn't like,
Right.
sure, yeah, sin, whatever. I'm not worried about that part. From a practicality standpoint, as your mother, please wait until you're ready to be a parent. you know so
Yeah.
again,
Logical.
she kind of froze up and didn't really want to say no. And this is where enthusiastic consent matters, because there was no, even if she appeared to be consenting, there was no enthusiastic consent. So anyway, once it happened once, why not, whatever. Pass me around to your
Nothing mattered.
friends, like, yeah, nothing mattered. And
Yeah.
so he would take her, she would check into drama, and then he would take her, and he was a year younger than her. This was a younger
Wow.
child that was her predator. So again, none of these bells are going off, because not Hollywood. Not Hollywood. And for me, I went,
Right.
well, she would tell me. We talk about everything. I'm like you, we talked about early, like, I don't have a filter. I talk freely about all kinds of things. So
Right.
um, I kind of, at that point, I had been taking her cell phone. So I was like, how was he getting in touch with you? She had used either Facebook Marketplace, or I can't remember the other. There's like sales apps, like yard sale apps, where you can buy like a used cell phone. And she knew that she was going to get her cell phone taken away. So she had prepared 2 hidden cell phones that she knew she could go get Wi-Fi calling and Wi-Fi access at the church parking lot or at the library, or like there's public Wi-Fi places, which is a great thing to have. But how did I know that she, who didn't have a job or money, was able to get 2 backup cell phones that she could use to be contacted or contact? So that was a big element also. Right.
Ugh.
So once I realized like she's melting down, like we're not in a good space anymore, she's now refusing to go back to school, I started noticing that she became very, very adamant that her door was to remain shut always, and she wasn't leaving her room. And I went, oh, I don't like this. I really don't like this. So we told her that we were getting a new cell phone carrier, or that, I don't remember what it was, but we had to activate a thing. She doesn't want her cell phone taken away, so she's going to agree to unlock it. And what we did was put a program called Spyzie. Spyzie. I'm not like, I don't know. I'm not an influencer, but that's what we used. I'm sure there's plenty of others out there. And it was rooted down into the phone where she couldn't see it. It didn't appear. She didn't know it was there, but it allowed us at any time on our computer to mirror her screen and see exactly what was going on. Wow. So we did that. And what we found was her creating child porn for people, for men on the internet, after she had been in the state hospital for 10 months. And I just was like, oh my gosh, Snapchat, everything else. So as I'm talking to my therapist and her therapist, and what do we do? This was all around like October. She had been working kind of at a restaurant, and she had started not being able to go into work, or, she wasn't sleeping at all. And just, there wasn't a good structure in place, and got to the point where she was like, I can't work anymore because I keep feeling like this predator that had raped her when she was, 16, the teenager, at any minute could walk through the door and she would be face to face with him.
Sorry, I'm just trying to get the timeline straight. So that had happened, and then she went into the state mental hospital after that.
After that,
10 months later.
But then she processed that this was an actual predator that was happening to her, and that he was someone that, right, now he's got some PTSD that hadn't occurred before because she thought she was complicit. She figured that part out and started meeting and chatting with these men on the internet, only sexually, all through like Snapchat and TikTok. And I started, like, I would monitor this, and it was kind of horrifying. The things that they were encouraging her to do. And I thought, how is this even a thing after what she's just been through? Why is she again a victim of now adult men, right? And I talked to my therapist about it, and she said there's a thing called recapitulation of trauma. So when she was a toddler and she had constipation, the doctor recommended a what is it called? An enema. And apparently it was traumatizing to her, because for the next week, all of her stuffed animals would be lined up, and she had her doctor kit, and she would give her stuffed animals enema, right? She would act out the thing that she was trying to process. So what was happening was a compulsion in her brain to process her trauma by putting herself in these same situations again, choosing to be around predators again, trying to control the situation this time in an attempt to bring back her power. Perfectly a normal response for a child's brain to handle trauma. Everyone else sees it as a slut, right? There's no such thing. There is sexually traumatized, and there is recapitulation of trauma. Like that's not even a thing that happens, because it's it's the way the child's brain works, as it was explained to me by my therapist. So
Yeah, it's a response
we started,
that
right.
age that they end with her neurodivergent, putting all the factors in
Mm-hmm.
place, that's how she would respond. It's not, yeah, it's not somebody choosing to be, a slut or whatever other horrible words
Right.
we have come
There
up with.
isn't any such thing. There isn't any
Yeah,
such thing, because you either have self-esteem and this is what you're choosing, in which case there's nothing wrong with it, or you're doing this in a very damaging, unhealthy way, in which case this is not a thing you choose. It's just you
right,
processing trauma. That's
right.
my personal
Oh, I
belief.
love
That I
that
don't believe in that
explanation.
word. It doesn't exist. We start watching this Spizy, and we start gathering data, and we start going to the police and handing it over to them, and we find out that Snapchat is actually notorious for refusing to give police data as it relates to crimes. That is the hardest social media. They just drag their feet and don't want to participate. Like, it literally exists so that you can't get that information. Even if you have
Yeah,
a warrant, even if there's an active case, even if it involves child sex abuse, they're not giving up the data. They're not giving up the proof. And
mm,
they're like, yeah, sure, we'll comply. And 15 months later, you might get something. So that was
oh my,
like an eye-opening thing to me, that even, yes, businesses can be predatory, but you would think that people would act in good faith when it comes to child sexual assault, right? Like, you would want to
yeah,
stop that. No, Snapchat
yes,
does not. Snapchat does not want to, doesn't want to cooperate with that. They're more than happy to keep that going. So
yeah.
we start doing screen recordings and screen grabs, and my husband and I watch our daughter in child porn basically for the next few weeks, trying to figure out how we can stop this and working with the police and things. And all of a sudden my daughter goes, I think I'm going to fly to Montana. And I'm like, it's November. You have no money. You have no job. Who do you know in Montana? And she's like, well, I was thinking I'm going to join the police force, and they have a really great police force. And so I'm going to fly to Montana on my 18th birthday. And we were like, ding, 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 ding. And I looked in
Some
her bank account, which
warm.
she didn't know I had access to. Because again, once this alarm started going off, she's trusting that I am not going to go track her passwords and grab all of that information so that I can spy, really. Like, I don't know if
Right.
she didn't think that I could, or if the social contract was that I wouldn't, or, dumb parents. I'm not really sure, but um, I went to great lengths, great lengths
Yeah.
to get all of this information. And we realized that this ticket was not for Montana, it was for St. Louis, Missouri.